du flytta kameran hit?
Den?
Ja.
Hit eller dit?
Ska den vika mot den? Så. Vik ut. Ken here from Backpacking Light, and today on this beautiful Sunday I just kind of decided that I would spend my Sunday, instead of being with my family and friends and my little boy, and I would just set up a few single man tents just to kind of show them off, to show the differences and so on, what you get for the weight. Yeah, so right now I have here is the Echo Shelter 2. It's just the tarp, because on a day like this I probably wouldn't bother with anything else. And you kind of see it's pitched against the wind. I didn't actually plan that, it just kind of happened, but it's good because it gives you an idea of how it handles in wind if you just happen to put it up against the wind. Now the wind was blowing actually the other direction when I set it up, and now, well, then I've got the Lunar Solo right there, the Hilleberg Enan there, the tarp tent notch, and the Hilleberg Nyack off in the distance there. Now of them, the Nyack of course is a little bit bigger than just the solo tent, but I think it's still worth mentioning as the weight limit still makes it lighter than a lot of single man tents, or even two man tents for that matter. It's actually fairly lightweight and good tent, but it is the heaviest of the bunch. Now there are many ways I could do this. I was actually looking, I've got a light hard gear solo packed down, and I've got the Fly Creek over there. But I feel that 5 tents is enough to just kind of give a general direction. And I think a rule of thumb to follow when lightweight tents, or when choosing a lightweight one-man tent, is, do you use trekking poles? That'll give you an idea of one kind of tent. Or if you don't use trekking poles, that's your other style of tent. Because if you don't use trekking poles, then having to bring something like the notch with trekking poles is going to be heavier than bringing it in on. So that's kind of how I think, you know, if you don't use trekking poles, then get a tent with a loop, of course, instead of having to bring trekking poles. I'll go ahead and climb in each tent to kind of give an idea, you know, how big I am in these tents, and I'll talk about each tent respectively. About the only thing they have in common is that they're solo tents. That's it. So yeah, just to give an idea, I'm 190 centimeters, about 6'3", and I weigh about 200 pounds or 90 kilos, 89, 90 kilos. Yeah, so I'm a big boy, which means that if a solo tent looks massive with me in it, then it's a massive tent. Because most of the time I think that, for me at least, finding a solo tent that fits my length is hard to find. However, all of these tents, they fit the bill quite well. They're all big enough for me. I've slept in all of them. I've used all of them quite a bit. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and climb into each, and to just give a show off of each tent. Yeah. Wait, wow, that's really off. So this is the Echo Shelter 2, and it's actually supposed to be a 2-man tent, but just because of my size, I think it's closer to a 1-man tent. But you can definitely fit 2 people in here. I didn't put up the inner tent and so on. You can see that on another video. And that's because I normally don't use the inner tents or the beaks or anything like that. If I'm going to use a tarp, then I'm going to use a tarp. Now, really the positive thing with the Echo Shelter 2 is that there's different aspects to it. You have the inner tent, the outer, and the beak. And you could easily just leave any of them at home. So in this instance, I have it just as a tarp, which is excellent if you're trail running in forest and this kind of thing. You know, where at least here in Sweden there's a lot of cottages. So if the cottages are filled, there's people in them, then you just put out your little tarp and you're good to go for the evening. It gives you an easy shelter. It weighs about 300 grams, just the tarp. The complete system minus the trekking poles is 800 grams. And this one's got a lot of miles on its back because I really liked just using it. It's been a lot of fun. Now, of course, for me, one of the biggest drawbacks, now I've got it set pretty low, but you know, setting up tarps, it does take some practice. Not as easy as you would hope it be. So, for example, when I'm in the mountains and I'm setting up, it's raining all day, and I get to a mountain and I'm spending 5 minutes just setting up a tarp. There really is funner things to do than setting up a tarp. You know, and it is tent peg intensive. It's at least 6 to get it into the ground, and it takes some balancing act and all of this. It takes the 2 trekking poles. But to get it stable in this kind of wind, then you need 8 pegs. So it's kind of a trade-off. You get the weight savings, and if you're using trekking poles and you don't mind just sleeping like this, you know, in the open, then it's hard to beat the Echo Shelter just because of how modular it is. And you can see it is big enough to just kind of chill out in here. If you got a storm and so on, it's well, I like it. I mean, I've used it for a long time, so obviously I like it. But there are, of course, drawbacks to tarps, to just a simple open tarp like this, or even the tarp shelter in its full. And I'll move on and talk about the Lunar Duo here. Now, the Lunar Duo, you can see, I mean, I have it pitched. The whole pitch here is on a slant, so it's hard to get these really good pitches here. But I think you kind of get an idea. So, the Lunar Solo certainly handles wind a lot better than most single wall tarps, because there's not a whole lot of room for the wind to catch. I mean, you can see it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stakeout points, and a lot like the what's it called, the Trail Star. So you have the one pole in the middle, and then just these stakeout points that makes it just really low to the ground if you want it to. Like I said, this is kind of a crappy pitch, but I can go ahead and climb in just to give an idea, because you can even pitch. You can see these pitch out points here. Fantastic. Just gives you a lot of wind protection for the weight. And I think this one weighs, if it was 650 or 700 grams, I'm a little unsure exactly, as I don't have it in my head. But I can climb in just to give an idea. The advantage of the Lunar Solo is that it's a very fast and light tent. It's fast to set up, it's easy to set up, it's lightweight, got great wind protection. For me, it's on the small side. Of all the tents I'm showing here today, this is the smallest one. It's got a lot of ground space, but it's a lot tighter. This is, I mean, much like the Trail Star, it just really slanted walls, and it is dependent on how high you pitch your trekking pole. Now, like I said, because of the slant that I have here, it's really hard to get a good pitch here, so it's going to be a lot lower than it normally was, so it's not really representative of how it actually is, but fuck it. It's got probably the biggest floor space of all the single man tents except for the Nyack, but it's also got the really steep walls, so like I said, much like the Trail Star from Mountain Laurel Designs, it just has these really steep walls, which is great for wind but bad for, you know, movability inside of it. But it is a big tent. It's a airy tent. It could either be a lot of wind, you can pitch it much higher, or you can pitch it really tight to the ground. And then with these extra tie outs, it's a beast in heavy winds. So this is definitely a great option for the mountains, because you can, you know, it could just be gusting like crazy, and if you just pitch it really tight to the ground and you put out these extra guy points, it's not moving. So that's definitely something this is definitely a tent I could suggest for, you know, just the more shitty weather alternatives, I guess. I'll go ahead and close this just to kind of give you an idea of how it looks when it's fully down. So, like I said, because of the slant and the just the kind of pitch it is, it looks a lot lower than it actually is, but you can see how it's built to withstand the heavy winds. And if you need to, you just stake out these guidelines as well. And it really is a beast in heavy winds. Yay! Okay. The Hilleberg Enan. That one. What an awesome tent. If you've read my blog, Ultralight and Comfortable, you know I've done a review of the Hilleberg Enan. I did this last year, I think last April or May. And I'd used the tent for about 6 months when I wrote that review. And you know, I ended up selling it, moving on and doing some other things, and now you see it's back in the arsenal, but that's mainly because I have a backpacking shop and I love the tent, so I decided I would bring it back. As I've said in the review, it is fairly easy to set up. It takes, well, in my written review, I said that it takes two pegs and the pole, and you're pretty much done. But I was kind of making it a simplistic equivalence, I guess. I was making, you know, I mean, you can put it up with two pegs and the pole, but not really. I was just, you know, whatever. It's actually closer to 6 pegs that you need to set it up, which for me I think is a bit overkill. But the reason is because it has, you know, you have to set up the 2 poles, the 2 pegs there, and then you have the 1 peg sticking out, so that's your 3 pegs there, and you have to do the same over there if you want to get a really good pitch on it. But with that said, 6 pegs and the hoop, it's a fantastic tent. You know, Hillebergs are just known for quality. and the Enan's no exception. I don't want to talk about condensation because all tents have a lot of condensation. Even a fucking tarp open has condensation if the temperature's wrong or right, depending on how you look at it. So I'm not going to talk about condensation. Now, if you do use trekking poles, the Enan's pretty pointless. Because then you're looking at the tent itself at 1.2, and then on top of that trekking poles, which is another 300 grams at least. So you're carrying 1.5 kilos when you wouldn't need to. Now, if Hilleberg would make a trekking pole style Enan, depending on the weight, of course. So I'll go ahead and get in and show the Hilleberg Enan, just to give you an idea. Yeah, so now I'm here, more or less inside of the Enan, and the Enan has great floor space for its size. Not for the weight, but for the size. It's a small tent that has a very tight footprint, which is great, especially if you're doing a lot of varied kind of camping and so on. So anyway, yeah. So, of all the tents, for me the Enan is the smallest as far as headroom, and you know, it's pretty much only over the loop, and I'm still, you know, touching so just the nature of the beast, I have to compare it with the Octo. The Octo, I hated the Octo. Well, I liked the Hilleberg Octo, but I hated it. I hated it because it sagged, the inner pole, because the two speak up, or the two hanging thingies that held up the inner tent, they were on the sides, here and here, which means that the inner tent was here. So I certainly wouldn't do something like the PCT with the Hilleberg Enan. It's just too heavy for that kind of use. Even if I was using trekking poles, or not using trekking poles, I still wouldn't bring the Enan. But if I were to hike, you know, and I have a lot of camera gear, so I'm not going to bring trekking poles, and I'm going to be up in northern Sweden, or in maybe walking across Scotland, you know, in the shittiest time of the year, then I could definitely see the Enan as being a great choice. You know, you'll probably never have to replace it if you've accepted the weight, and you've kind of accepted that you're not going to use trekking poles, and you're okay with some of the limitations. Then it is a tent that you can be happy with, just because of the sheer quality of it. So yeah, the Hilleberg Enan.